4 years ago, Ukraine taught the world a brutal lesson. Cheap drones and cheap rockets can bankrupt expensive defenses. This week, that lesson showed up over Iran, wearing an American flag on offense and a laser on defense. Hey friends, Wes Danger O'Donnell here.
Danger's my middle name.
Veteran of the U.S. Army Infantry and veteran of the U.S. Air Force, where we live in fame or go down in flame because...
nothing will stop the U.S. Air Force!
And Ukraine rewired how modern militaries think about mass, cost, detection, and air defense survival. You can see that wiring in two systems getting name-checked right now. The U.S. Lucas one-way attack drone and Israel's Iron Beam laser air defense. This is the Ukraine lesson going global, and it's moving fast. If you followed the Ukraine war closely, you already know the pattern. Drones got cheap, drones got plentiful, and drones got good enough. They didn't need to be perfect. They needed to be numerous. They needed to force decisions. Ukraine spent years making hard choices at night. Do you fire an expensive interceptor at a cheap drone because it's headed for a substation? Do you reserve your interceptors for cruise missiles and eat the drone damage? Do you rely on guns and hope the weather doesn't ruin your optics? Do you accept risk because you have to save inventory for tomorrow? Well, that constant math problem became the defining operational rhythm of the Ukraine war. And now we're watching other militaries import pieces of that rhythm into their own fights. The Ukraine war didn't only create new weapons, it normalized a mindset. Quantity matters, cost matters, and the side that can sustain the economic burn rate often dictates the pace of the campaign. In 1991, you could talk about air superiority like it was a binary condition. In 2026, it's closer to a budget and a logistics contest layered on top of physics. You're not only asking, can we intercept? You're asking, how long can we keep intercepting before we run out of money, missiles, or patience? That's why these two systems matter. They are not isolated gadgets. They are expressions of a global shift. So let's start with the ugliest and most influential weapon of the Ukraine war, the Shahed 136. Russia's use of the Iranian-designed Shaheds, locally known as Garans, against Ukrainian cities turned one-way attack drones into a nightly reality. Cheap airframes, loud lawnmower engines, simple navigation, and a payload that's good enough to wreck power infrastructure and keep civilians awake. The whole point was quantity. Make Ukraine spend scarce interceptors and scarce attention on disposable targets. Now, Ukraine learned to hunt them with everything. Patriots when it had to, NASAMS, IRIS-T, guns, searchlights, mobile teams with machine guns, even creative airborne solutions. The point was not elegance. The point was survival. Now, fast forward to the Iran conflict. Reporting describes U.S. using low-cost one-way attack drones modeled directly on the Shahed design in strikes on Iran. Whew, if that isn't poetic justice, I don't know what is. The low-cost unmanned combat attack system, or LUCAS. Now, the number that keeps popping up in coverage is a unit cost of around $35,000. That's not an accident, that's a choice. LUCAS is based on a reverse-engineered Shahed concept. And the reason the US would do this is simple. Ukraine proved affordable mass works, not in theory, in practice, night after night. So what's the Ukraine to Iran connection here? Well, Ukraine turned Shahed attacks into a proof of concept for affordable mass. They just did it as the defenders. The US watched a relatively low-tech drone create outsized operational and economic effects in Europe, then built its own version of it and employed it. Ukraine showed that quantity can be a weapon. So the US decided it wanted quantity too. Now let's switch over to defense because this is where Ukraine has been the world's unwilling instructor for 4 straight years. Every time you shoot down a cheap drone with an expensive interceptor, you win the engagement and you still lose a little bit of the war of endurance. Ukraine has been doing that math nightly since the first Shahed started arriving in waves. And that math is exactly why lasers, pew pew, pew pew, stopped sounding like a science project and started sounding like a procurement emergency. Ukraine's contribution to this story isn't only the problem set, it's the proof. In late 2024, Ukraine's Unmanned Systems Forces commander publicly claimed Ukraine had a laser weapon capable of downing targets above 2 kilometers. Then the Tryzub name started surfacing more consistently in 2025 reporting, including claims about its role as a counter-drone system, and the idea that Ukraine was trying to build a cheap per-shot layer for the same reason everyone else wants one. Now, whether Tryzub is already a widespread battlefield laser or still closer to a limited evolving capability, the strategic effect is the same. Ukraine made the directed energy conversation concrete. It stopped being, one day we'll have lasers, and became someone is trying to use lasers right now because missiles don't scale. That matters for Israel because Israel has been chasing this exact solution for a couple of years now. Iron Beam wasn't born out of Ukraine, but Ukraine poured gasoline on the bonfire of the idea that you simply need cheaper shots. Iron Beam is a long-running Israeli program built for a harsh reality Israel knows well. You can't afford to spend premium interceptors on every cheap inbound Iranian threat forever. So what's the connection between Tryzub and Iron Beam? Well, it's not origin, it's validation and urgency. Ukraine showed the world what saturation looks like when it becomes routine. It also showed what happens when defenders are forced to ration interceptors and accept risk. When Ukraine starts publicly talking about fielding lasers, even in early form, it reinforces the central point Israel has been building toward. Lasers are attractive because the marginal cost per shot collapses. And in a drone and rocket era, cost per shot is the strategy. Ukraine also proved the other half of the equation. Mass isn't just a pile of drones. Mass is mixed salvos, decoys mixed with real targets, repeated waves timed to hit reload windows, and attacks designed to force defenders to spend, rush, and misidentify. In that environment, a laser layer is not a replacement for missiles, it's a pressure release valve. It lets you save your expensive shots for the targets that truly require them, and it keeps you from bleeding out one interceptor at a time. Ukraine made the economics of air defense impossible to ignore. Tryzub showed where that thinking is headed. Iron Beam is what it looks like when a country with serious industrial depth turns that concept into a fielded layer. And there's another Ukraine lesson that matters, even if it's less flashy than a laser. Ukraine's air defense survival has depended on integration, sensors, queuing, handoff, and layered engagement zones. If you rely on one sensor type, the enemy routes around it. If you rely on one effector type, the enemy overwhelms it. You see this in the way Ukraine has built a national detection network. You see it in how it's fused Western systems with Soviet legacy systems, and then turned around and fused that with homegrown AI-driven software. You see it in the way Ukraine made phones, acoustic sensors, spotter networks, and data fusion part of its air defense picture. And you see it in the technical details coming out of Ukraine testing. No single widget solves the drone problem. You need RF sensors, radars, EO, IR, sometimes acoustic, and a command layer that fuses all of it fast enough to matter. Now, bring that back to Iran, the US and Israel. Well, if the US is using Lucas offensively, it's because it believes mass and autonomy can penetrate or saturate defenses. If Israel is using lasers defensively, it's because it wants a cheaper layer against the types of threats that try to saturate. Both ideas make more sense after 4 years of Ukraine's nightly drone math. And I hate math. The Ukraine war created a feedback loop. Cheap drones got results, so defenders adapted with layered sensors and cheaper intercept methods. Attackers adapted by going quieter, flying lower, mixing decoys, and scaling quantity. Defenders adapted again. Now that loop has gone global. Reporting describes the US using a mix of weapons and strikes on Iran, including low-cost one-way drones, not just the Lucas, but also the Tldr, along with airstrikes, guided bombs. That's the Ukraine loop in practice. Mix mass with premium effects. Force the defender to solve multiple problems at once. And on the defense side, Israel's move toward lasers sits inside the same logic. You don't replace interceptors, you add a layer that keeps you from spinning a Ferrari tire on a nail. This is really tempo and sustainability. It's how long can you keep fighting at the pace modern war demands. So the Iran war is one of the first major conflicts where Ukraine war lessons showed up in Western hands at visible scale. Ukraine didn't just change how Ukraine fights, it changed how everyone fights. It taught militaries to copy what works fast, to embrace cheap mass, and to treat air defense as a layered network where cost per shot can decide whether you're still standing on day 10. Ukraine didn't get to opt into being the world's test range. Russia and Iran forced it into that role. But Ukraine adapted anyway, and the entire planet watched the results. Now we're watching those lessons boomerang back into other theaters, and suddenly, everyone is pretending they invented the concept of cheap mass and layered defense. Nope, Ukraine taught that class. Everyone else is just copying their homework. And if you're wondering where this goes next, it's not hard to guess. More cheap drones, more counter-drone layers, more directed energy systems, more automation, more speed. Modern war is accelerating. The uncomfortable part is that it rarely waits for diplomats to catch up. Okay, stay frosty out there, my friends. Subscribing is the best free way to support this channel and help support human creators, not robots. AI ain't got a mortgage to pay, folks. And as always, glory to Ukraine, glory to the heroes. Crimea is Ukraine.